I got my first hive when I was 14, and I've had bees ever since. And I didn't decide to be a commercial beekeeper until I was in college. We have been keeping bees in Indiana for 113 years. My great-grandfather had an orchard in southern Indiana, and then my grandfather, when he was in high school, he got his first hive to put in the orchard to pollinate it. And then he became a school teacher and a commercial beekeeper. And then my mother, she became a school teacher and a beekeeper in Mooresville, Indiana. And then I taught school for 30-some years, and we're currently running about 1,000 hives. Most Americans would say, well, they make honey, and that is true. But here at Hunter's Honey Farm, we can actually harvest 7 different products out of the beehive, and all of them but one can be beneficial to the human body. Not only do we harvest honey, we also harvest the wax. So the bees eat the honey and digest it, and then they have glands on their abdomen that they secrete scales of wax from. And they take those wax scales and they construct the honeycomb that we see in the hive. The beekeeper will take that honeycomb, melt it down to a liquid, and pour it into a mold, and that is your beeswax candle. So beeswax is melted honeycomb, which is digested honey. Therefore, honeycomb is safe to eat. You can chew the honeycomb, you could spit it out if you wanted to, but if you choose to swallow it, it will act as a roughage. It's very good for your digestive system. Each flower that the bee visits can produce a different color and flavor of honey. In the United States, there are over 400 different types of honeys. As the season changes, we are able to produce many different varieties of honey, and they all taste different, and that's the thrill. And as you're traveling around to different parts of the state or the country or the world, look up a local beekeeper and try different types of honey. When I was in Africa, I was able to taste avocado honey. Texas, you can taste cotton honey. So there's 4,000 flavors of honey in the world. So the honeybee basically has 2 foods. It eats honey for its carbohydrates, and it eats pollen for its protein source. But just like with human food, one apple could have a different nutrition than another apple depending on its variety and depending on how it was produced and how it's processed. So the same is true for the honeybee's diet. So each flower produces its own flavor and color of honey and can have different nutritional value. So as a rule of thumb, the darker the honey, the more vitamins, the more minerals, the more enzymes, the more antioxidants. And even the pH of the soil can change that honey and change that pollen. We all know how important the honeybees are to our food production. In fact, honeybees are responsible for every 3rd bite of food that you take today. The honeybee is in a decline, and that is true. So honeybees have natural predators such as birds and skunks and raccoons and bears, and these play a small problem for the bees. However, our biggest threats are 2 mites, the varroa mite and the trachea mite. The first problem with the mites started in 1986 here in Indiana. And since then, the honeybees have gotten worse. Their populations have gone down. Wild colonies have decreased possibly up to 50%. Beekeepers have probably lost over 50% of their hives, and I believe honeybees would be worse off if it wasn't for the beekeepers replacing their dead hives. The problems are just as real and just as major, but the beekeepers are trying to keep the bees going. There are new treatments for these diseases, for these pests, but nothing is surefire, and so the beekeeper is still struggling. The bees are still dying off. There are 4,000 species of bees in North America. Honeybees that you see in Indiana, in Morgan County, Monroe County, are going to be the Apis mellifera, and they're going to be fairly docile, fairly gentle. Unless you are in the beehive, if you just see a bee on the flower or in your yard, it's probably not going to attack you. Now, obviously, if you step on it, if you squish it, then it's more likely to sting you. Even a beehive, you can usually approach cautiously, quietly, slowly, and you should be okay. It's only when you swat at a bee, when you disturb them, then they're going to sting you. Respect the bee, but don't fear it. We are using a bee that is hardy to our winter, that is gentle and easy to work with, but yet produces a lot of honey. In a typical beehive, there are 3 castes: the queen, the drone, and the worker. The queen has a misconception that she is in charge of the hive, but that is not the truth. Truth is, she is simply their egg machine. She is the only female that they have picked to reproduce, and she will produce up to 2,000 eggs per day. She doesn't go to the flowers, she doesn't produce honey, she doesn't sting and protect the hive. All she does is produce eggs for her lifespan of 3 to 5 years. The males are called drones, and they're similar to the queen, except they are going to mate with the queen for reproduction. And a drone will live until it mates, or until the fall, and then the other worker bees will kick the drones out. And in the hive there will be approximately 300 to 600 drones. All the other bees that you have seen, the bee on a flower, a bee that stings you, the bees that make the honey, those are the worker bees, the infertile females. And there can be anywhere from 50,000 to 80,000 workers in a hive, and they do everything except the reproduction. You know, bees are so fascinating. I've been around them all my life, and I never get tired of studying them. Somebody took a macroscopic photograph of a bee's face up close. Just amazing, the intricacy. We don't realize that there is hair all over the honeybee's body, on their wings, on their legs, on their chest, on their back, on their stomach, even on their eyeballs. All parts of their eyeballs contain hair on them. So I never get tired learning about the honeybees. Every year I learn something new.